Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of Days with Phillip on the Auburn Undercover podcast. My name is Nathan King, joined by the titular Phillip Marshall and our publisher, Ronnie Sanders, and a lot to get into this week, the Deep South's oldest rivalry edition of the show here. But first off, Phillip, I mean, there was some huge news. Obviously, I'm sure every Auburn fan saw it on Wednesday evening. Their long-awaited quarterback commitment. Deuce Knight, former Notre Dame commit, one of the best quarterbacks in the class, a guy that Auburn's been recruiting for a long time. We've got him rated as the number 5 quarterback in the class. He is the 3rd best quarterback recruit of the modern era for Auburn, only behind Jason Campbell and Bo Nix. And both those guys are first-round draft picks. That ended up being pretty decent. Phillip, I guess, we're not gonna get too much into this. Jason and Christian will talk about it on our podcast. We're not going to get too much into that side of things, but just from your perspective, the significance of not only getting a quarterback, which is always important, but getting a guy that Hugh Freeze has wanted for months now, and they're finally able to seal the deal on him.
Yeah, I think it's always, anytime you get a big-time quarterback, it's always good. My only caution is, I think sometimes people might get a little carried away and say, well, that's our guy. He's going to come in and start from day one. And not that never happens, but it rarely happens. And, I'm sure he'll get an opportunity to compete for it. And if he is that guy, then maybe it'll happen. But mainly to me, what it says is that, I think a lot of people, every time when things go badly, like they've gone for Auburn the last few weeks, that, oh my gosh, the recruits are going to start going somewhere else. And it's long been my experience that who wins or loses games is not that big a factor with guys deciding where they're going to go. For one, they've all lost games. Every one of them has lost games. And most of them have lost games that they said, how in the world did we lose that game? But obviously, if you say whatever you want to about last weekend or whatever, but the job that this Auburn South, led by Hugh Freeze, has done recruiting is nothing short of remarkable. What are they, number 4 in the 247 sports composite?
They number 3 now.
They moved to number 3. Okay.
They jumped LSU.
That's really impressive, and also that will probably help with, because look, they might be 5-0, and there still wouldn't be any guarantee the whole class that nobody in the class is going to change his mind. But it might, but that if there isn't somebody kind of on the fence, getting a guy like that might, particularly if he's an offensive player, getting a guy like that might help with that. But it was huge news for Auburn for sure.
I think the other thing is, if it's a complete collapse and you end up at 3-9, like 2012, I think that it can hurt your class. But if you look at, Hugh Freeze in his second year, he's recruiting well, and Auburn has a chance. It should be 5-0, and
yeah.
So for these guys to look around and think, hey, I got a chance to come in and play.
Just like last week, look at all the freshmen that really stood out last Saturday, and really, even though Auburn lost, of course, in a strange way, I thought it was the best game they played this season. Certainly, it was the best Peyton Thorne has. I thought before the interception, I thought it was the best. He was playing the best game he had ever played at Auburn.
I agree.
And they see that too. And now, that doesn't make they need to keep getting better. And it would be helpful if they don't get blown out by Georgia. Of course, it'd be really helpful if they beat Georgia, but that's a tall order. I don't see. Well, one, I don't see them going 3-9 or 4-8 for that matter. I think they'll be right there around 6 wins. Maybe they'll get there and maybe they won't. And I haven't been overwhelmed by Missouri. And I talked to an old friend of mine last week who is without identifying him, I'd just say he helped him out, Missouri. And he said, they're not as good as everybody thinks they are. And on top of that, they're not playing very well right now anyway. So I'm not saying Auburn to beat them, but I think it's a toss-up game. I think Kentucky's a toss-up game. Texas A&M's at Auburn. Obviously, Louisiana, Monroe, and Vanderbilt, you're supposed to beat them at home. So I think they've still got a decent chance to get to a bowl game, which after a two, that's not what you maybe set out to do, just get to a bowl. But after a 2-3 start and considering their schedule, that would be a pretty good accomplishment.
Yeah, and I mean, Phillip, as we look at next season too, I mean, I think the biggest thing with Deuce is that it helps your quarterback situation in a sense that, are you going to get a transfer? I would think so. Maybe not. I could be wrong. This is a conversation, for later down the line. But, if that guy doesn't work out, or even if he does, you just having the safety blanket of not only Deuce Knight, but Walker White, who was the number 5 quarterback in his class.
Walker White and Deuce Knight are going to compete for the job, most likely.
Yep. And it could be next year.
And it could be next year. More likely, probably the year after that. But they'll probably them and Hank Brown. I don't want to eliminate him. Will at least compete probably, and Deuce Knight. Assuming they get a transfer that's going to be the starter, and that's just an assumption. I don't know that. But then they'll all compete for the backup job, and we'll see where it goes. And
then a couple of them will transfer out.
Yeah, probably. You can't. There's not. Well, to be honest, if you're Deuce Knight or if you're Walker White, and you're basically in the same class, because Walker will still be a redshirt freshman next year, and you get beat out, then there's probably a pretty good chance the one that got beat out is going to leave. And that's not 100% true, but there's probably a pretty good chance it's true for guys like that think they can believe they can be a difference maker in a good program.
Phil, why has it been so difficult recently? I know when I was a kid, Auburn was not when I was a kid, but I remember when Auburn pretty much dominated Georgia, and now it's kind of flipped.
Ronnie, the Georgia thing is really truly interesting. Georgia has dominated Auburn a lot more than Alabama has. Auburn, since 2015, Auburn has Auburn's either beaten Alabama or should have beaten them. Mm-hmm. And of course, they played Georgia right down the wire last year at home too. But in Athens, particularly, really, and I wrote a column about this the other day. In 2005, after Auburn won 31-30 in Athens, they had won 6 out of 7 games in Athens. They had won, and that was the way the series went then. Both teams had a better record on the road in that series than they had at home.
Absolutely.
And but the next year, Georgia came to Auburn in 2006. Auburn was ranked 6th in the country and had 1 loss. Georgia had 4 losses. They had really been a big disappointment. I believe they lost to Vanderbilt and Kentucky. I want to say that may be wrong, but that's my memory, and my memory is questionable. So, but they came to Auburn, and their starting quarterback was a freshman, and just shredded them, beat them 37-15, and ran out the clock at the 2-yard line. It was no game, and that was I don't want to get into rehashing that season, but Arkansas did the same thing a few weeks earlier, and that's the only 2 games they lost. They went 11-2. But after that, it seemed like Georgia beat them pretty soundly in Athens the next year. The next year, they beat them in Auburn in a reasonably close game in Tuberville's last year. Then they beat Chiswick's first team it was 24-17, I believe. And And then Auburn won in 2010 and 2013. But the strange thing is that really starting in 2014, when Auburn lost a real heartbreaker to Texas A&M, not unsimilar to what happened Saturday, except the difference was Auburn was ranked number 3 in the nation and thought they were going to be playing for the national championship. And Georgia beat them 34-7. And since then, they scored 7 points that year in Athens. They scored 7 in 2016, Kirby's first season, which they clearly should have won the game. Georgia wasn't very good. They had, I know, lost to Vanderbilt. They had to have like a goal line stand to beat Nicholls State by 2 points. And anyway, after that, in 2018, they scored 10, and that's the most points they scored in the state of Georgia. Since then, they scored in 2018, they scored 10. 2020, they scored 6. 2022, was it 3? They got beat 48-3 or 45-3 or whatever.
10. They scored a late touchdown.
10, okay. But they have not scored more than 1 touchdown against Georgia in Athens. And Gus, it was a strange thing because Gus, his offense just died whenever they went to Athens. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't only after Kirby got there. It started before Kirby got there. So it's been a strange thing. And, of course, Georgia's flipped the series. They won 16 out of 19 now, counting the SEC championship game, where Auburn also only scored 7 points. And an interesting take on that is, in that 34-7 loss, they scored on their first possession and went ahead 7-0. In 2016, they scored on first down on their first possession and went ahead 7-0. And in the SEC championship, they scored on their first possession and went ahead 7-0, and didn't score anymore. It was so how it's happened. That's 5 different coaches. I mean, this clearly is this be Hugh's first trip to Athens as an Auburn coach, so it's not on him. It's 5 different coaches starting with Tuberville, and the only games Auburn has won have been in 2010, 2013, and 2017. That's 2 teams that played in the national championship game and one that won the West. So strange. That's all I can tell you is it's strange. Because, like I said, it's been now they haven't come really close to winning in Tuscaloosa since 2010. But every game in Auburn goes right down to the nitty-gritty. And like I said, obviously everybody knows what happened last year. 2 years before that, they had a 10-3 lead, and Alabama's on their own 3-yard line and forces it into overtime.
Well, if you remember in 2014,
it's 34-7. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I mean the Alabama game. It was Auburn
55-44. Auburn was ahead by 12 points midway through the third quarter. They kept
and should have been ahead by more.
Oh, no doubt. They were inside the 5-yard line. I want to say 3 times.
They kicked field goals
and didn't
They
score.
kicked a bunch of field goals at the start of the game. Yeah.
And
there's a difference in the game.
Yeah, and I thought Auburn was going to win because right at the start of the second half, Auburn intercepted the pass and went and scored, and that's when they were ahead by 12 points. But then they couldn't cover. What's his name?
Was it Julio Jones there?
Amari. They could not cover Amari Cooper.
Amari Cooper, yeah.
That's right. Nobody could cover Amari Cooper in 2000.
And the problem is, I asked Ellis Johnson after the game. I said, "Why didn't you double cover him?" He said, "Because if we double covered him, we couldn't stop him from running the ball." And so that's how it goes. It's kind of like in the game. Auburn won 48-45, and Alabama threw a bunch of long touchdown passes. And I asked Kevin Steele, I said, what was the problem keeping them throwing passes? He said, well, they got 3 guys, 3 real deep threat guys, and we got 2 guys that can cover them. He said, that's a problem.
It is.
And but anyway, who knows? I think that it would take. I'm not a believer in miracles, but Auburn would have to play an almost mistake-free game, and Georgia not play a mistake-free game for Auburn to have to be able to be in the game at the end. I think if Auburn doesn't turn it over, it'll probably be a competitive game. But
well, I also think that the game that that Georgia played last week, that takes a lot out of you. And my guess is that they're going to be, even though Auburn is probably their biggest rival, playing Alabama last week, it will take a lot out of you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Who knows? Who knows? But if Auburn goes over there and turns it over multiple times, then
forget it.
Probably ugly. The other thing about it is, I think Auburn's very young secondary to deal with Georgia's passing game, and I don't know if they can or not. And if you demote, just like we were talking about earlier, if you devote too much to trying to deal with that passing game, then they can run it too.
Well,
I don't believe they're as dominant on defense as they have been in recent years, Georgia.
I would agree with you. And I think the other thing, Phillip, is you talk about Auburn's got young receivers, they got a young secondary. I mean, there you got. I think you wrote the other day 47
freshmen.
That's I think. Look, and I'm not defending Freeze over for last weekend. That was obviously that could have gone better, but when you look at when you look at what he inherited, people on our, and look, I don't want to beat up on our message board, and I understand people want to win, but it's going to take a little bit of time as these guys get more and more experience. They're going to get
right. They got 16 players left that Freeze inherited. Jarquez Hunter's recruiting class, the 2001 recruiting class, he's the only one left. And he really has only had one full recruiting class. I mean, he did what he could after he got here in December of 2022.
And still did better than March never did.
One full recruiting class, and as talented as some of those freshmen are, they're still freshmen.
That's right.
And
people want to compare to Ryan Williams, and not everybody's Ryan Williams either.
Not everybody's Ryan Williams, but you know what? If
Cam Coleman,
if Auburn had Milroe at quarterback, some of these freshman receivers would probably look better.
Yeah, and if Cam Coleman, wasn't injured.
That's the thing. He's been banged up,
and even still, as you and I talked about in that thread for a little bit, Phillip, even in the face of that, he's third on the team in targets.
Yeah,
and he's only third on the team in targets behind probably a guy who would be second team All SEC if the season ended today, and Keandre Lambert-Smith, maybe the best receiver they've had in like 5 years, and Peyton Thorne safety blanket in Rivaldo Fairweather. So the notion that Cam Coleman has been underwhelming early this season, I think is.
I agree with you. I thought that was a really ridiculous story, to be honest with you. But I think that comes from people wanting to just come up with something people will click on. But that's
there's been a lot of that lately. Look at Matt Hayes. I'm not going to go into that, but
I'll go into it. I read the story. Did you read the story?
I have not. No.
Well, he was writing about basically stuff that used to happen, and he quoted Terry from back then, from 25 years ago, saying, "Oh, it's there every day. It makes it so hard, the pressure and all this stuff." I mean, what the heck has that got to do with anything in 2024? Plus, pressure's on every head coach.
Absolutely. You look around.
I mean, that's just life. If you can't deal with that, you better not do it. But it's not just that. And I'm not criticizing anybody personally, but it's just there are, when I talk about the national media, I'm talking about ESPN mostly and ESPN.com and The Athletic and all those things. They get enamored with certain teams and certain coaches. I mean, they're still enamored with Colorado. And it's just unfortunate to me. And then it's a lot easier for them to take shots at somebody that's not doing well. I don't think there's some anti-Auburn conspiracy out there. I don't think that for a second. But I do think that there's a tendency to beat on people when they're down.
Well,
I guess one of the big things to me, and let me be careful here in case there's any Alabama fans listening to this. That was a tremendous win for Alabama last Saturday. They were also ahead 28-0 after their first possession of the second quarter, and then got outscored 34-13 the rest of the game, and only scored one more touchdown. To me, and that deserved to at least some notice. And, you know, Georgia's quarterback last Saturday threw 3 interceptions and lost a fumble, including an interception when they're on the 20-yard line with a chance to tie the game. And it would have been really interesting to me to see if Georgia had forced it to overtime, which it looked like they were going to do, if Kirby would have caught any grief for going for 2. Well, he went for 2 3 times and made it once. And the other 2 times were really, I mean, well, one was after they went ahead, and it made sense trying to get it to, I guess, a 3-point game. But the other one was just to be honest with you, it looked to me at the time like, well, he's just trying to score as many points as he can because he thinks the game's over. I'm not saying he thought that, but that's the way it looked. And so if he kicks all 3 extra points and they go to overtime, then Georgia has a chance to win straight up. But he didn't. I mean, they didn't score, so it didn't matter. But I just think that, you know, all the stories I read about Alabama and Georgia were about how great both of them played. Well, Georgia didn't play great in the first half at all. And Alabama didn't play great in the second half at all. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah.
But like I said, Georgia's quarterback, he turned it over 4 times. Do that on the road at Alabama, pretty hard to win.
Probably not going to win. Phil, talking about, you know, we were going to talk about, there's talk about a college football commissioner, and there's also the SEC and the Big Ten are talking about a scheduling agreement.
Did one of y'all see Sankey's comment when he was asked about a commissioner?
Mm-hmm.
I'm paraphrasing him now. He said, "Why would we do that? We're not going down to them. If they want to be like us, they need to catch up with us." And of course, this whole 72 team, super team, this bunch of people from New York came up with, never ever will that happen. And I don't know what the fascination with relegation is. Relegation does not work in college football. There is no scenario in which it could work in college football. And but yeah, I mean, if I was everybody else, I'd be nervous about them meeting this weekend because I think, from what I hear, they're going to start playing each other more, and which is probably a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be able to do whatever they want to now. And starting in 2026, they're going to be able to do whatever they want to. And I think you're going to see a number, I don't know what number, of automatic bids for both of them. And personally, I don't really like that, because then I think right now, when you get to November, a lot more teams are going to have to be playing in big games because there's more teams with a chance to go to the playoff. But if you could start having all these automatic bids, then that really is going to, in my opinion, damage the regular season.
I would have to agree with you. But I also think that, the Big Ten and the SEC, those teams playing each other, it'll be interesting. It'll be fun. I also think that it'll probably prove that my personal opinion is wherever you play in the SEC, you can lose any weekend if you're not ready to play.
Right.
In the Big Ten, some of those teams just aren't toward the bottom. They're just not very good, and they haven't been very. You
don't think Purdue's very good?
Well, Purdue used to be Kentucky. I mean, hell no. I mean, Kentucky's won 20 games 3 times or something in the last 10 years or something.
But I will say this about the Big Ten. I mean, Indiana hadn't really played anybody, but they're undefeated. Brett Bielema seems to be able to coach in the Big Ten a lot better than he could in the SEC at Illinois. Of course, Northwestern's not. They had a remarkable year last year under all the circumstances, but they're not very good this year. Purdue is not very good, I wish it was like it always used to be. Is what I really wish. I wish that the conferences were still the same, and that but that's never going to be again. And the other thing I read is that they're going to talk about the selection process. And as it was written, I said they don't trust the selection committee as it is now to make the right decision. If say let's just say this year with Georgia their schedule, which is very tough. Let's see they go 9-3, and somebody in the Big 12 or the ACC goes 10-2. In their mind, the committee has always just kind of said, okay, that's 2, that's 3, we take the one with 2. And I think they're going to want a system where they get more credit for who they play. And, a lot of national types are saying how disgusting it is and all this stuff. And but that's I don't know what anybody expects them to do. To be honest, I mean, it's Greg Sankey's job, the Big Ten commissioner's job. It's their job to put their conferences in the best position they could possibly be in, and to make the most money.
Well, we were talking about,
and then they, I guess people want them to then turn around and give half of it away, but I don't look for that. I don't see that.
I mean, I'm looking at the bottom of the, just looking here. I mean, you got UCLA is 1-3, Minnesota, he's probably getting fired. Maryland's 3-2. I'm just going up from the bottom. Maryland, Purdue's awful. Wisconsin's not very good. Northwestern's awful. I look down the SEC. I'm just not sure that
Mississippi State, maybe.
Mississippi State. Even Vandy's improved this year.
Oh yeah, they got a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I thought they were going to win at Missouri. Watching that game, but it'd be good. Clark Lee, the Vanderbilt coach, seems to be a really solid guy. I mean, I don't know him, but he seems to be a really solid guy. So you got to be happy for him because he's kept his nose to the grindstone. And
hard place.
Lost his first game to Tennessee Tech or somebody like that. So, but his first game, he was there. I'm talking about. But I just wish that the game's as good as it's ever been on the field. All the stuff going on all around it is just makes you wonder. It is now, but what's it going to be like next year, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now?
At some point, there has to be some kind of a system to handle NIL and all these different things because the
settlement, assuming it gets settled,
that's
with competitive players, but they still got carte blanche to get all the NIL money they can. And I guess, was it Georgia that this week passed a bill? It may not have been Georgia. One southern state passed a bill to allow NIL for high school players. To me, see, that's how in the world can antitrust laws apply to 16-year-olds and playing high school football, which makes no money? Doesn't even dream of making any money. It's hard for me to say. I don't know. I don't get it. But
I was talking to an agent the other day who has done a number of NIL deals, and his point was, he said, "Hey, we got the NCAA and all these people saying we're not at pay for play." He's like, "We are at pay for play." So I've done enough of these NIL deals that none of this is they're getting paid for the name, image, and likeness. They're getting paid.
Oh no, most of them are getting paid by the collective, and they have to send out a tweet now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And that's their job.
And they're not getting they're getting a lot more than their promotional value. And so we are we're not at pay for play is a fallacy, because we are. That's where we are.
When it first started, people were writing and saying that, well, it's not that big a deal because there's not that many players that would have enough name recognition to interest businesses. And I said, you watch. And then pretty quickly collectives came into being, and there it went. And now there's nothing, people complain about the NCAA, and maybe they could have dealt with it better 10 years ago or so, or seen it coming and been better prepared. But right now, there's nothing they can do about it.
Really? You mean Tommy Tuberville and Joe Manchin aren't going to get it fixed?
Well, Joe Manchin won't. He's not in Congress anymore. But it's just so different for old guys like me. And the thing, I guess, that bothers me the most about it is, I've been talking to college football players for many years, or basketball players, as the case may be. And I can count on less than 3 fingers the time anybody said to me, we're not getting treated fairly. In fact, and Ronnie, you know this, you talk to guys who played 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. See, I've talked to all of them those years. They absolutely cherish the experience.
There's no question. And now the gear that they get, I remember walking in, and Phillip, you remember Frank Cox. I remember Frank Cox handed me a sweatshirt that didn't even have Auburn on it, and a pair of sweatpants that didn't have Auburn on it, and they had been used, and probably for a number of years. And I was, I've still got those sweatpants in here in the closet, but and I ended up my locker number was 3, and Rusty Williams' locker number was 3, and I ended up with his sweatshirt. I think it's still in there too. Here's the difference. His was in the player locker room, but I think all those guys cherish the memories that they make, and I know that when I was around it, the one thing I really miss is being around the guys and being around the coaches. I was always late to staff meeting. Ron Zook used to tell me, hell, if you can't get here on time, just get here whenever you can. Being in the staff meeting at you get in there at 8:00 or 7:00 sometimes. It's fun being around the coaches and having that camaraderie and being around the players and seeing the impact that that you can have on their lives. And
and I still think some of that exists. I do. And but it's you're worried about, okay, this guy's really not ready to play, but maybe I better play him anyway, because if I don't, he'll leave.
Yep.
And and a bunch of them leave every year. A bunch of them will leave in December this year. And I'm sure some from Auburn will leave in December this year. I understand why you do it if you have come to the conclusion that you're not going to play a significant role, that you might want to go somewhere where you can. I understand that. But as we all know, it goes a lot deeper than that now. And it's hard to know how much money people are getting since it's not public record, but I think it's a lot more than people thought when NIL came into being. I'll just put it that way.
There's no question about that. I've seen a couple of contracts, and some of those numbers are pretty big, especially for a 17 or 18-year-old. I mean,
yeah, it terrifies me to think what I would have done with a few $100,000 when I was 18 years old. It would not have been pretty.
Same here.
Well, that's part of that's what makes me interested to see when revenue sharing becomes a thing, because NIL collectives are still going to become a thing. I think that's the part that people need to make sure they pay attention to is, a collective is more in a lot of senses than just the medium in which money is transferred. I think a lot of it, in the original sort of purpose from a glass half full perspective was to get kids prepared to have that kind of income and basically be semi-professionals. And so, like you said, it's you're giving a lot of money sometimes to college kids, but I think a lot of times too, if they've got the right collective, which Auburn seems like they do a good job of this, there are avenues to help them through that, help them learn about taxes. When you don't cross those T's, that's when you get in trouble. Not to talk about the Sluka thing again, but I mean, apparently this is kind of unrelated, but I mean, apparently his agent wasn't even registered to be an agent in the state of Las Vegas,
and didn't know the rule.
And so and
to me,
about getting help where you can.
The agent is the main culprit in that whole thing. And I'm going to tell you now, might be say, well, by dang, I'm leaving. But looking at his numbers and looking at the 59 points they scored the game after he left against Fresno State, who's a decent program, I'm not sure there's going to be $100,000 more waiting out there somewhere else for his last year. Maybe it will.
Well, I read the other day there was a story that one of the casinos I think stepped up and said, hey, we've got to.
Yeah, it was too late.
It was too late. Like we talked about.
Here's the thing. One, what's the assistant coach doing? Telling him something that he can't back up. That's the first thing. And then what's the agent letting him do? Letting him just take that coach's word when he ought to know that he can't back it up. And look, if there was a situation like that at Auburn or Alabama or anywhere in the SEC, and somehow it fallen through the cracks that he hadn't signed the contract, they'd still give him $100,000. But, I saw where the UNLV collective paid every player on the team $3,000. You'd have a hard time keeping an SEC team together for that.
No question.
So I'm sure that $100,000, which a big program with a big NIL could pay without a whole lot of trouble, I'm not sure UNLV even could.
Well, and you're right. And UNLV, the UNLVs and the San Diego States are much better jobs now than they were 10 years ago. But they're still not an SEC program. Phillip, talk a little bit about how the business has changed. We started this 16 years ago. I remember, we had and still do have pretty strict guidelines for what we run. And we want to make sure that it's right. And I think we've been wrong a couple of times in 16 years, but not very often.
Well, everybody's wrong sometimes.
Yeah. And, but I remember.
Everybody's wrong sometimes. I at least it's not as bad now as it used to be, Ronnie. When the paper would come out and you'd look at it and try to proofread it and make sure everything wasn't all right. It was all right, and then it was, and you'd go home, and then you'd pick up the paper the next morning, and it was like it was about that big. So some screw up, and there wasn't anything in the world you could do about it. I mean, it was just there. At least now you can fix it. But it's changed tremendously, and that kind of goes back to what we were saying. It's opinion and news have kind of gotten mixed up together, and
that's not just in sports.
No, and you got so many podcasters and this and that and the other, and a lot of them really are just fans with a podcast. But now a lot of them, they go to press conferences and they do those things, and they're still fans. And I've told people for years, you can't, especially some young person that I hired right out of college. Look, you can't turn off your feelings the day you walk in here to work, but you just got to be professional. It's not about how you feel; it's about how professional you are, and that's changed. And it's not just podcasters either. I mean, look at you hear prominent national sportscasters talking about my team, my this. Of course, I'm for them. I went to school there, etc. Well, I know I'm old and I know I'm a dinosaur, but in my newspaper days, which ended when I came to work for Auburn Undercover, that's just not something you did.
And it shouldn't be now. We were talking, you mentioned earlier Matt Hayes and the story that he wrote. And, Pat Forty is pretty much the same way. I mean, I remember, I mean, he would rip us every week. At
about
Pat Forty. We were at Florida. I mean, he made a point to take every jab he could take. And I'm sure you remember the Dan Mullen's wife.
That's and a lot of people at ESPN.com that I have had and have respect for worked on that story. But when you use as an anonymous source, somebody you say an anonymous source who recruits for Mississippi State, and it's the head coach's wife. I mean, come on. I don't think that a lot of stories are researched as well as they should be, and I'm sure you could say the same things about some things we do too. But it's just again, it's just different, and I think that I said earlier they tend to find somebody to pick on, and a person sent me an email not long ago, said, well, what do you expect with Auburn's history with the NCAA? Talking about football. And I said, well, the problem with that is, here's this. The last time Auburn had significant sanctions with the NCAA from the NCAA was 1993. That's 31 years ago?
31 years.
And just about everybody in the SEC has had something since then. And then, of course, came the expected. Everybody knows they paid Cam Newton. I said, well, if they did a good job because they got away with it.
I can promise you, even if Auburn did pay Cam Newton, that Auburn's not the only program in the conference that was paying people before.
No, it's been going on forever. There's no question about it. I've been looking for an NIL deal myself, but I can't find anybody interested.
Well, we'll give you one here. Stay around, you're gonna stay around.
They don't seem to think I'd be a very good spokesman, but some guys, in addition to collective money now, some extremely prominent players get, you have guys on that Dr. Pepper commercial. I guess Quinn Ewers is on it this year.
Mhm.
And last year it was Caleb Williams from USC, right? Quarterback.
Yeah, even Reggie Bush is getting his Heisman house back in. I mean, it's
that's fine, but I don't believe, at least from what I've seen, I don't believe it's had a bad effect on the game. And I think they're still college kids, and they still care about each other, and they care about their coaches, and they want to do good for their families.
And they want to have a great college experience. The vast majority of them do.
Yeah. So.
And they want to go a place where they're comfortable. I mean, just like just like the receiver. I mean, he had other offers. I believe he took a little bit less to come to Auburn, and I'm sure he's had a great. Certainly seems like he's having a great experience. But you want to go where you're comfortable. If you walk into a room full of guys you don't like versus a room full of guys you do like.
Well, I think there's some truth to that, and even in the in the NFL. If you really like where you are, you may take less to stay there,
and that happens a lot.
Sure. I mean, and at that point, you got families and everything else to be concerned about. But
these guys, they want to win championships, and so. If you're a quarterback and you're making $20-25 million a year plus your endorsements, you can take a little, and you should, if you want to win.
Y'all don't need to pay me $25 million a year, because I would be completely and totally worthless. And if I had a buyout, I would just say, look, I'm not doing anything. So y'all can either pay me or I'll just sit here.
I hear Jimbo is now making the rounds on the speaking circuit. So
I saw where he said he wants to coach again.
I didn't see that. I had a call from your buddy Danny Sheridan the other day, and he said that, or an email, I should say, and he said that he see Phillip shaking his head. He said he had heard that Jimbo was speaking at the Gainesville. I think it was Gainesville Quarterback Club, which I thought was pretty interesting. But
did he tell you who the bag man was?
No, he didn't tell me who the bag man was.
I've known Danny for many years. I lost a lot of respect for him in that saga.
I'll tell you what, the first time I met Danny Sheridan, Mike Godfrey and your buddy Paul Feinbaum introduced me to Danny. And he was coming to speak at the Quarterback Club or the Gator Club or something in Gainesville when it was my first year there. And he's an interesting guy. He has an interesting take on things, and I couldn't repeat some of the things he said on the podcast, but he's an interesting dude. He really is.
Yeah, and but I mean, I like him.
I do too.
But like I said, I lost some respect during that deal for him and some other people too. And though it was good for Auburn undercover,
it certainly
got a lot of subscriptions.
We certainly did. And Nathan, that's before you started, but I mean, we for a long time it was Phillip and me, and we cycled through a number of people. Yeah, Nathan, you and Christian lasted a good long while.
Yeah, don't cycle. Don't cycle anymore. If that's
well, you got to remember, Nathan, it started off just me for about the first, Ronnie, but Ronnie was wherever you were, and
I wasn't at all.
So I was the only one covering Auburn on a daily basis. And really, the first recruiting class, we didn't do very much. I mean, we reported what happened, but we weren't breaking stories or anything like that.
And we had to build our own database, Nathan. I mean, you know,
But
that was supposed to
then
be.
we started hiring people, and I'm not gonna even say how or why, because I don't want anybody to feel like I'm insulting them. But it took us a while for it to kind of get straight. I'll just put it that way. And but then we were fortunate in that the Cam saga, and where we really broke just about every story.
Yeah.
Well,
you did, and then when
then Tuberville ends up leaving, and the coaching search, and we did break every story, I believe, on that between Ronnie and me. And
we did on Gus too. I mean, I think we broke every assistant hire except one.
the memory that sticks with me forever on that, we were affiliated with ESPN then, and we had the Chiswick story. Well, first we broke the story that they were even talking to him, which people were saying, "What? He had lost 10 straight games at Iowa State." And then we broke the story about him being hired, and ESPN a good while later writes that he's been hired and says reported by, and they list all these teams, all these outlets, and not us. I was not very happy.
No, if you remember,
what was his name? Dan something or something.
What's that now? Yeah, Dan Rubin. He called up there, and
I cussed him like a dog, and he said, "Look, Phillip, you're going to have to understand. You're just going to have to prove yourself." That wasn't a good thing to say either.
Hey.
So, but
I tell you,
those were interesting times.
Hey, I remember, if you remember, we had the rights to 6 ESPN sites, and so, if you remember, we had Auburn, Alabama, LSU, Florida State, Mississippi State, and LSU or Oregon. I'm sorry, Oregon. And but I remember it's that same thing with ESPN. And it's been long enough now, I guess I can tell this. So Jimbo gets ready to hire. This is on the Florida State side. Jimbo gets ready to hire Mark Stoops, and his name had not been mentioned. He talked to some people, and so I knew what was going on. And so he calls me and he says, "Hey, I'm going to hire Mark." And I said, "Well, can I run it?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I put it up, and ESPN refuses to run it. And I got on the plane with some of the other publishers and went up to Bristol, and I'm sitting around in the conference room with the ESPN brass, and I said, they said, "Well, listen, if we can't run anything unless you got 2 sources." I said, "My source is the head football coach."
What you need 2 head coaches.
What's that?
I say you need 2 head coaches.
I guess. I said, "Well, who else would you like my source to be?" I mean, nobody else on staff knows it that I know of. So,
of course, I had no clue what I was doing when I started this.
Hell, none of us
did. I thought I was just going to slip over here and do it like the same thing I'd been doing, that newspaper. But I don't believe ESPN had a clue about this business either.
Well, they didn't, and Shannon Terry, who for those who don't know, started Rivals, started 24/7, and now On 3. Shannon was in discussions for quite a while with ESPN before his non-compete was up, and was going to launch the day after his non-compete was up, and he finally got tired of waiting on ESPN. They wanted. He's like, "Well, you guys don't know how to grow it," and he had proven that he did, and he finally said, "Screw it, I'm." And then we went and recruited a bunch of those sites over, including Bucknuts and some of the others. So
when did ESPN stop doing team sites? What year?
when we pulled out. When it was
around that same time he's talking about.
Yeah,
2010 was it? Isn't that when Shannon started 24/7 Sports? 2010.
So, yeah, it was 14 years ago. So it's 2 years after we started. So yeah, 14.
Yeah, which was look, you know, I understand there are mixed feelings about Shannon, and I probably got some mixed feelings too. But that move was good for us. I've told the story a lot of times. I said, before I took this job, I called myself thoroughly researching it, making sure I wasn't putting my family at risk. And within a year, all the other sites, all the people that had been hired at all the other sites had been fired. Every one of them.
Well, if you remember, our investors were on the Mississippi coast, and so first you had that oil spill, and then you had Katrina, and hell, I mean, they were all of a sudden our investors were worried about keeping their other businesses afloat, and so it was an interesting time for sure. It's pretty amazing that even now, 16 years later, the Florida State side is still very well, doing very well, and the Oregon side is the largest in the market by far, plus Auburn undercover. So it's we did something right. I'm not sure, but like I said, I know a lot of people have different feelings on Shannon. Personally, I'm grateful for the opportunity that he gave me.
Me too. That's what I'm saying. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I can't. That's we didn't always see things the same way, but you and I didn't see things the same way either. So you'd have been a good spectator, Nathan, to see some of mine and Ronnie's discussions back in those days.
Oh, I've heard a couple stories.
We were Becky and I were on vacation, and I'll tell you a story. Ellis Johnson, who is our normal guest every week during football season, Ellis was the head coach at the Citadel, and so I called him and I said, "Hey, we're gonna come to Charleston. Are you gonna be around?" And I gave him the dates, and he said, "Yeah, I'm not gonna be here." He said, "But come on up anyway." And he said, "We'll just say that you're speaking to the coaching staff, and we'll put you up in the hotel here." So I came on up, and we stayed in Charleston, and I don't remember what happened, but I remember being in the hotel, and you and I were screaming at each other. You said, "I'm gonna quit," and I said, "Well, hell, go ahead."
Yeah, I think the problem was neither one of us really had a good grasp on what we needed to do.
No,
and but it worked out good, and I'm grateful, and it's been I wouldn't change it.
Well, I think we've had our own not really with you guys, honestly, but with colleagues on the beat. I think it's such an interesting industry. Like, it's such a strange and different thing from a lot of other jobs, because it is competitive, but you see each other every day and you're friends, and you do a lot of stuff outside of work. And so it can't be mean and cut, but at the same time, I've had, I think it's an interesting industry in the fact that you can have something happen. I've had plenty of situations with my friends that, comes up and you disagree on something and you get kind of mad. And then no more than 3 hours later, it's like, all right, are we good? Have we said our piece here? All right, see you tomorrow.
Most of my best friends I've had in my life are people that were in the newspaper business, and most of them were competitors. I'm going to tell one story, and then I guess we've about gone long enough. But
I've got one after you get finished.
And I can't remember the year, but I found out that Joe Thomas, who was the president of the University of Alabama, had written Jim Martin, who was the president of Auburn, saying that probably they just needed to quit playing each other. And I got hold of the letter itself. So we were, Alabama and Auburn used to have these big golf shindigs. And I was down there, but I spent most of the time in my room. I called Joe Thomas, who was in a state of shock when he discovered I knew about it. And and Jim Martin and a couple other people. And anyway, then my closest friend at the time worked at the Tuscaloosa News. And so finally I was done. I don't think I wrote the story there. I think I wrote it when I got back. But anyway, then I wrote the story, and my good friend that worked at the Tuscaloosa News called me, and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Billy," that was his name. I said, "Billy, I'll give you the shirt off my back, but I'm not giving you my story."
You said that a bunch of times over
And yeah, that one caused some ruckus, to say the least.
You talk about, and look, we've grown to have or I have anyway, have a deep respect for you and
Me too, obviously.
But sometimes we could end up on this, but I was our last year at Florida. It was our third year, and we all knew that, hey, it's winter. We're gonna be looking for a job, and so we're in preseason camp, and Ron Zook and I were extraordinarily close. The players call me Mini Z, and so if I was around, or if he was around, he wanted me around too. So one day we're in the weight room, and I don't even remember what it was about now, but we got into it, and we're yelling at each other in the weight room. Now, typically that's not what you want to do with the head coach. And so I stayed pissed off for about probably a week. And he was good. I mean, he was, and so later on, it'd been about 6-7 days, and I'm in his office, and he'd ask for something, I'd hand it to him, and I'd leave. And so we're in there one day, and he starts kind of talking. He said, "Hey, he said, sometimes the people you love the most, you treat the worst." And I found
probably some truth to that.
There's some truth in that, yeah. And but look, we were all under a lot of stress, and hell, when we started, certainly you and I were under a lot of stress. We didn't even have, Nathan. We didn't even have a database. I mean, we had to build our own database. I mean, the ESPN network was not really a network. It was a group of sites that were definitely not tied together.
And Ronnie, you had the because he had just come from Southern Miss, right? Southern Miss was your last previous job, right? Well, Ronnie had their recruiting list and all the recruits' phone numbers. And that wasn't everybody we needed, but it was a good many of them. And that helped. I remember that. That helps. But one thing, I figured out a lot of things. One is that, I couldn't do what I did at the Huntsville Times and write my stories and then go to work on the next day. You had to have stories over the course of the day. I figured that out, and I already knew that we had to do a lot better job of covering recruiting than we did that first year. And but it wasn't nearly as, they had a person who covered who handled recruiting, or maybe two. And you had to try to obviously develop a relationship with them. And one of them was Scott Fountain, who is now at Georgia, a really, really good guy. And that was easy. The other one was Andy Lutz, and I'm not saying he's not a good guy. I'll just say that was not easy. And but one of the things I miss the most is being able to be around and go back there and talk to the coaches and those kinds of things. In fact, Ronnie, when I started this, I got Tuberville to stand up at a staff meeting and said, "Hey, Phillip's doing this now." He said, "Give him everything you can."
Yeah, I remember.
And which I appreciated. And
no question.
But now that's very difficult. I would not want to be a beat writer now. It's not.
I will say, it's this staff in particular has been, they're very open, and I think just sort of genuine is kind of the best way I would put it. You see them at practice, you see them around the facility, and it's just sort of, it doesn't feel very, you you kind of develop a relationship.
Here's the difference, Nathan, that I see. One, I could really every coach going back to Doug Barfield, I could go up and walk into his office and tell the secretary, "Hey, I need to see him," and she says, she might say, "Go on back," or she might say, "He's not here right now." And I said, "You know what? He's going to be back." She'd say, "Yeah, he's going to be back at such and such time. You can come back then." But I don't. Maybe I'm wrong, but like I don't. If you're right, I don't say you. Like I'm talking about you specifically. If someone is writing a story about Peyton Thorne, can you walk up there and go and see Ken Austin and ask him about him and quote him? So that's what I mean.
Yeah. No. Oh, yeah. Definitely. I know what you're saying. I think it's a lot
My
of
impression of
products
these guys, they're all good guys. I don't have anything bad to say about any of them, but and I think a lot of them would be perfectly happy for it to be that way.
I don't think there's any
The
question.
head coaches have become too paranoid now. They're making too much money. They want to be in control of everything.
And Phillip, you were talking about, I mean, and that certainly, the access helped us grow, and your connections, and but from a recruiting standpoint, and us covering recruiting, when everything really, you're breaking a ton of stories, obviously, but from a recruiting standpoint, when we hired Keith Niebuhr, we really, when we were on equal footing from a recruiting standpoint, then we really were on equal footing with.
Yeah, except for after he got his camera stolen out of his car.
That was pretty rough for him for about.
But I tell you what, now I'm going to say this, and I'm not saying it for any reason other than I believe it. Our man Christian does as good a job as anybody I've been around in this business.
Christian's
absolutely.
And Jason too. I mean, with Jason's help, but Christian is the guy covering it on a daily basis, and he is relentless and seemingly tireless.
We were certainly fortunate to be able to, when you lose a guy like Keith, you're always worried about drop off. But when he left, and I didn't know Christian well, I heard good things, but and he was still under contract with Rivals at the time. We ended up waiting him out, which Keith was also not happy about because he couldn't leave. But
good move. Good move.
But
it's a good suggestion. I wonder who. I wonder who pushed him your direction.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathan. But it was.
I fear that.
Being able to replace Keith with Christian was really, again, the last couple of years, I think he's been phenomenal. Overall, as far as everybody being on the same page, pulling in the same direction, and actually liking each other, I think we're probably the best we've been in 16 years.
I agree. I'm probably a lot easier to get along with now since I'm not the one under the gun. So
I wouldn't say that. No, I'm kidding. But we've enjoyed it.
Well, Phillip, I wanted to ask you real quick before we got off. It doesn't seem very likely Auburn will win this game. You never know. But what would you want to see from this team on Saturday? Maybe besides, hey, don't turn the ball over. What would you want to see from this team in a really tough road spot in this game? Well,
I don't care if you got a team full of seniors. Playing in an atmosphere like that on the road is hard. When you're playing a bunch of freshmen that have never been, none of them have ever, those guys have been on the road at all, much less to Georgia. And, I think that you just want to see them, I think they got a chance to score some points. I'm not talking about 40 points, but I think they got a chance to score some points and see them execute and see them make it hard on Georgia on defense, not give up a bunch of easy plays. And if they do that, then I think they'll have a chance to be in the game. And I'll go ahead and say what I picked. I picked 34-20 is what I picked. And 14 points could be not a close game if you're behind by 30 and lose by 14. Or it could be a close game when you're ahead by 7, when you're behind by 7, and then they score right at the end or whatever. And it is a close game. So I think Auburn would have to play, not turn the ball over, not get a bunch of penalties, and Georgia would have to play somewhere below their top level. Like I said earlier, the biggest thing I would say is biggest question I would have is if their secondary can hold up against Georgia's passing game.
Yeah, you go into a bye week too after this. I feel like it's important to
at least feel decent about yourself.
Yeah, I feel like you executed on offense.
You don't want to get beat 42-7 or something.
No,
which is possible if you don't play well.
Hey, it's always possible in Athens.
Yeah,
if you ball it 4 or 5 times, it's certainly possible.
But what was your first year at Auburn, Nathan?
My first year was 2016, but I actually, funny enough, I did not attend a game at Georgia until 2022. It was in 2016, my grandfather passed away, and so we left that week, and I didn't go to the game. I was in the band. 2018 was my first year covering the team with the Plainsmen, but my brother got married that weekend, so I didn't go. 2020 was COVID, and it was my very first game with you guys after getting hired. So obviously my credential wasn't submitted, and I didn't go because I didn't get hired. I don't know if y'all remember, I got hired like that Monday of that week. And so, I mean, it was a quick turnaround. So 2022 was my first time ever in Athens, and it was awesome. It's a great place to watch a game. But I, haven't seen Auburn be very competitive there.
I don't know how many games I've seen in Athens. Most, not all, but most of the ones since 1971. That was the first Auburn-Georgia game I had ever been to, and Sullivan and Beasley put on a show. Sullivan basically clinched the Heisman Trophy that day, and Auburn won 35-20. And but most of the games until recent years there were close. And to be honest with you, the few that weren't close, Auburn won. I mean, Doug Barfield took 2 Auburn teams to Georgia and just beat the stuffing out of them twice. Now, Georgia they weren't very good. But lately, I mean, it's the main thing I remember is about that 2022 game is Auburn was stopping Georgia early in the game and then decided it would be a great idea to run a fake punt from deep in their own territory, which did not work. Georgia took it right in, and that was it. That wasn't much of a game after that.
My first trip to Georgia was 1990. Was it 96, the overtime game?
The overtime game? Yeah, 1996.
First overtime game in college football history. We had 4 overtimes.
SEC history. I don't think it was college football history. I think it was SEC history.
Oh, maybe it was. Okay, I thought it was. But either way, it was
4 overtime, yeah.
It was 4 overtimes, and
Georgia cheated. Robert Edwards was a great running back, and he had been beat up, and he did not play in the regulation at all. Did not go on the field, and then they go into overtime and put him in, and Auburn couldn't have caught him on a motorbike.
I'm sitting on the sideline with Lionel James, and we go to overtime, and he looks at me and he's like, "This is over. We can't stop this guy." And he was right.
But the worst thing about that game is that at the end of regulation, with like 6 seconds left, Auburn sacks Mike Bobo to end the game. Mm-hmm. It's 28-21. Auburn had been ahead 28-7, but it was 28-21. They sack Bobo, and when he's on the ground, he's down. He just lets the ball roll out. And Charles Dorsey, the Auburn defensive tackle, comes running by and picks it up and runs the other way. Now, I think even then, most officials would not have stopped the clock because it was over. There was no chance for Georgia to get off the play. And Georgia snaps the ball with 1 second left. and spikes it, which you couldn't do now. I mean, they spiked it with 1 second left. Now there has to be 3 seconds. But anyway, so then for whatever reason, and Bill Oliver was the defensive coordinator, and he was good, but it's one-on-one coverage in the end zone, and he just basically throws a jump ball, and the Georgia guy jumps up there and gets it and forces overtime, and 4 overtimes later.
That was rough. That was rough trip home.
That was in Auburn.
No, it was in Georgia.
No.
Are you sure?
I'm 1,000% positive.
Which year? I'll hit it right now.
Okay, so it was
which year? 1996.
Okay, so it was the next year. Okay, so maybe you're right. It was the next
year when they were playing that rap song and all that stuff at Georgia, and Georgia was in all black.
Yeah, 1996 was at Auburn.
About 3 degrees over there.
Of course, it was at Auburn.
Yeah.
I'm old. I'm not that old.
Hey, the next year then, you're right. It was at 97. It was so cold. I'm not sure I've ever been that cold.
But yeah, that was the 96, 97. It was like 40. What was it? 97, Nathan? While you're looking,
I got you.
What was the score in 97?
Yeah, I got you. Well, what's your guess?
It was 40-something to 20-something. I remember that.
45 to 34.
34. Okay, but it wasn't that close. I'll tell you that. Auburn was in the game. Auburn was in the game, and then Georgia. Will Muschamp was Auburn's defensive coordinator, as he was in 1986. Not 1986, 1996. And Tuberville told me, Tuberville by then, you got to understand, Tuberville didn't like coordinators getting too much credit. and he told me after the game, he said, well, they flipped the tight end on our defensive coordinator and he didn't know what to do. I said, okay, whatever, it worked. And but in 2022, Ronnie, remember that Georgia threw a touchdown pass on 4th and 15 to win the game, 4th and goal with the 15 to win the game.
And let us not forget the 86 game.
We mentioned that one earlier.
Okay.
Matt Stafford and 37 to 15.
No, I'm talking about the 86 game, the water.
Oh, no, 86. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hey, I was stealing my column for Saturday morning now. But, oh, yeah, the 86 game was that was a sight to behold.
Phillip, were you at the 2007 the SEC championship game 2017?
Yes.
Do you remember how cold? You're talking about a cold game. Do you remember how cold the dome was that day down on the field?
Oh, the SEC championship game. I thought you said national championship game. No, I really don't. I'm not saying I did.
They left me and Jason are able to. I was in the band. Jason was taking photos. We connected on this the other day. They left a garage. I don't know if you remember that they canceled the Peach Bowl parade that year. It snowed on New Year's Day in Atlanta. It was freezing cold. They left a garage door open on the bottom floor of the Superdome. It was the first game that was played in the new Superdome. Not Superdome. What am I saying? Georgia. It was the first game played in that new one. And they left a big garage door to a loading dock open for like 2 hours. And so the temperature outside, and Jason said, I mean, I was down there before the game, but Jason said it was like they had a thermometer on the sideline and it was like 40 degrees when the game started.
Right.
In an indoor stadium.
Remind me of new stories. John Majors, who was head coach at Tennessee and was a great guy and a friend of mine. But he told me they played at Rutgers one year and they only won 7-0. And it was cold outside. It was cold. It's not a dome, but it was in like East Rutherford, the stadium in East Rutherford where they were playing, not on campus. And he said that there's big doors at both ends. And he said whenever they had the ball, they would open those doors. And he said, and the wind coming howling through there and all that stuff. And he said, then when Rutgers got the ball, they closed them back.
I've got a couple Johnny Major stories, but I don't think I can. I don't think I can repeat.
Oh, I got some I couldn't tell on the family podcast, but he was an interesting guy now, and he liked to have a good time.
That's what I hear.
Oh, there's no question about it. There's no doubt about that. And but anyway, enough stories, I guess.
Well, Phillip,
We've only been going an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
That's all right. It's rivalry week.
That's right. Well, Phillip, it's good to see you again for another edition.
Always. Glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, me too. At least for right now.
We appreciate if you've stuck around to this end of the show, then that means you're a devoted listener. So we appreciate
That's
you.
right.
And we'll talk to y'all later.